In this video, I want to talk a little bit about data, and more than that, data management. And more than that, how to avoid some basic mistakes. It comes down to this. When you first learn GIS, you tend to think in terms of the visual images that you see. Maps are really compelling, and GIS sort of forces you to look at that map. But remember, when you're working in ArcPro, you insert a map. What do you insert that map from? Well, you insert it kind of from your data. And if you want to look at your data in Arc, I urge you to go into View and open up Catalog View. Do this at the beginning of every single project that you engage, and you will save yourself some serious heartache. Within Catalog View, I'm in Folders, which allows me to browse my data. You'll see I've connected to my Lab 1 folder. And within that, you'll see the sort of standard view of the data that we've been as we've been looking at them this summer. A couple things are added to it, but you see this bin, data, doc, results, SRC folder structure, and all of our data for, in this case, I'm looking at the lab practical, are contained within these various folders. Now I'm showing you this because I think in some cases, just floating around the room, it seems like having a handle on your data, which is something I struggled with when I was first learning GIS, is really step one. And knowing where your data are, what format they're in, how you're saving things, why you're saving them there, is very, very helpful. Now, the way I would suggest viewing this is when you first download this set of folders from Drive and connect to them, what I would recommend that you do is view this data file as sacrosanct. You're not messing with that stuff. What you're going to do is work with this stuff, and I don't know why impervious is in there. Let's get rid of it. What you're going to do is take these data and work with them, and I recommend doing that from a working directory. I've placed one here in the results folder for today. So you'll see in this folder I've got all of those same objects, including the stray info folder from the impervious file, which shouldn't have been there. So here are our data. That's what you're working with. When you first encounter these things, sometimes I find it useful to take a look at those very same things in File Explorer just to see what components of these data you actually have. And you'll see most of these files have multiple components. Remember, there are minimally 3. But the fact that City Neighborhoods has this PRJ file tells me it's projected. Somehow it's got a CRS, either a geographic or a projected coordinate system associated with it already. I don't need to define the projection. And I can sort of view all the files that way. If you look through this list of files and you see a lock file, it's because it's open in Arc. When things are open in Arc, you can't manipulate them in File Explorer. It places lock files. There's a workaround for that. You just copy all the files that aren't lock files, and then you can push things around however you want. But File Explorer, I think, is not a great place to work with your data. I think it's far better to do it in Arc Catalog. Now here, I can take a look at the geography. I've shown you this before, I do believe, of any files. If I want to look at those neighborhoods, I can. I can also look at the attributes. Do this before you put it into a map. Do this. Get to know your data. Because if you just dump everything to a map, then it just gets more and more confusing. I recommend only putting in the files that you need so that you kind of pare down what you're looking at. And remember that you can have an unlimited number of maps open. So every time I start something new or think, oh, I need to look at this differently, I'll just create a new map. I'll put today's date on it. I'll put this afternoon or something like that. So I remember when and how I did things. Also notice here, I've got 8.3.22. If I'm like, I got to start all over, I'll leave that folder there for now. I'll create a new folder, copy all the files over, and work in that folder. That way I can always revert. I can compare what I'm getting from one time to another time, and it's not just a giant bucket with my data in it. Another thing is when you are running any kind of geo process, let's say I'm creating a buffer, when you create that output feature, save yourself a lot of heartache. Click this folder. Arc will automatically dump things into a geodatabase. That's what this huge string is. It's sort of a default geodatabase that it dumps files into. If I don't tell it not to, that's where Arc's going to steer me. It's trying to get me to use the geodatabase format, and there are lots of good reasons to do that. But I tend not to. I tend to stay in shapefile mode. If you take a shapefile and do an operation with it, it ends up in a geodatabase. You can retrieve it, but you have to convert it back to a shapefile. And since I often work in other programs with shapefiles, I like to keep a generic format rather than a proprietary format. So when you are doing any operation, be really deliberate about where you stick things. Like, for example, here, I would go into my results folder and make sure that I'm saving everything into that folder. Do it every single time. And I'm telling you, every single time. I misplace things all the time because I don't take the time to check this. And if you do, that gives you just a moment to think about where you're putting things before you send them there. Also notice when you run an operation like a project, it'll just stick a suffix on the shapefile that you enter. So if I took the census data here and reprojected it using the project tool, it would say census data. The new object would be census data underscore project. Well, if I'm projecting it into state plane, I'll change that project into SP so that when I look at it, I know it's in state plane. Things like that you can do to save yourself a lot of time. Furthermore, the first time you look at your data, remember to take a little ownership of them. Inspect them. If you look at the properties, you can see what their spatial reference is. So at the very beginning of the practical, ask yourself this: do I know what projection each of these files is in? Are they all the same? If you don't have an answer to that question, you're really not ready to start working in a map, because working in a map will screw you up, or it could, if you don't check the projection information of the files. So these are all tips for avoiding data catastrophe. You can ask anybody in the classroom, probably everybody's had some sort of data catastrophe before, but these can take hours, if not days, to fix, and you can save yourself all that trouble up front by taking just a little extra time and being deliberate about basic data management practices.